So, welcome everyone, and hello to today's IAPC&M CPD Building Masterclass. My name is Julie Kennedy, and I am your host all the way from the Netherlands. I wish I was in Thailand or somewhere else, but for now I'm in the Netherlands. Now, today we have an amazing soul with us, Anne-Marie Meyers, founder of the Soul Awakening Academy, specialized in spiritual counseling, coaching, holistic wellness, and energy work. So welcome, Anne-Marie. We've been lucky to have you before at our International Coaching Week. But first, some housekeeping. So our call today will be a maximum of 1 hour, including 15 minutes Q&A. The session is recorded, so if you could please just mute yourself and keep your video on, because it's so much more fun when we can see people. Use the chat box for questions and suggestions, and I shall be asking Anne-Marie in a minute if she would prefer to take them as we go along or at the end. Our topic today is trauma-informed. And we are all coaches here, and I think this is something that we certainly do need to be. So I hope you have your CPD pen, your CPD pad and your pen ready and are eager to learn, especially at this time of the day. We need to get ourselves sharp again. And all over to you, Anne-Marie.
Oh, thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. I can't see everybody who's here the way that my computer screen has shown me a few people, a few faces that I recognise. So it's really... I'm always really privileged to be asked by the IAPC&M to deliver anything like this. Trauma-informed has become such a key area in coaching. There are so many factors around it, and I'll hopefully explain that in a way that you leave the webinar with some, deeper knowledge and probably a deeper thirst to learn more about the subject as well. I'm going to turn my video off. Is that okay? You should still be able to see my slides. If you can't, let me know. But tech really is a bugbear. I don't know. I've yet to find anybody who enjoys the technical side of being a coach.
Exactly. I think we all can relate to that.
I know. Okay, so I'll start my presentation for you now, but I would suggest any questions, write them down and let's open up a Q&A at the end. Hopefully this webinar is about 45 minutes long. If it's any shorter, then we've got extra time, but I'll just crack on and sit back and take it all in. So I'm Anne-Marie. You might have met me before, but I'm the owner of Soul Awakening Academy. I'm a master coach, author and trainer. Soul Awakening Academy is an online training platform dedicated to the development of life coaches and holistic practitioners. And as always, it's a pleasure, especially to introduce you to this transformative field of becoming trauma-informed. I'm really grateful for the opportunity, and hopefully, your decision to join me today, give me 45 minutes of your time and attention, marks the beginning of an enriching path for your professional growth, but also, as you will see, the profound difference it can make into the lives of the people that you coach. So what's our goal today? Well, it's my intention to make the next 45 minutes packed with invaluable insights and practical wisdom. So, as Julie rightly said, make sure you have a pen, a piece of paper, capture any golden nuggets, and keep your questions for me at the end. I'd like to talk about the subject with you. So we're going to cover why trauma is the word of the times. It's such a buzzword. Why trauma-informed, I feel, is a necessity, not just a fad. And we'll look at the key insights of something called the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood Experience Study, and its effect on health. We'll explore the rising role of spirituality or holistic healing in trauma recovery. And by the end of the webinar, you'll understand how becoming trauma-informed can significantly improve your practice and empower the lives of your clients. But before we get into the knowledge, I'd like to kind of introduce myself a little bit more and just share a part of my journey through trauma and resilience. Every 4.3 seconds, a new life in this world is born, a tiny being. And you can imagine that baby is an unwritten story. And the outcome of their growth, development, and their unique individuality will depend on a myriad of factors. But central to every newborn's journey is the bond with their mother. And it's a bond that shapes the foundation of our very existence. And as we know, unfortunately, not all mothers can provide the nurturing and secure home that every child needs and deserves. Well, my journey into the world of trauma-informed was driven by a deep desire to understand and help my clients navigate their deep-rooted emotional barriers to success. And in my research, I discovered how profound our earliest environment influences us even before we take our first breath. My own story started in the womb of a 13-year-old Irish Catholic girl. Her emotional turmoil set the stage for my earliest experiences, influencing my perception of the world. Studies now highlight how a mother's emotional state affects a developing fetus, impacting us from our earliest moments. My life, as you will see, mirrors the findings of the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, known as ACEs, and Nancy Verrier's concept of the primal wound. Her concept captures the deep loss and disconnection felt by infants separated from their birth mothers, a scenario which is increasingly common in our modern society. But my story is one of resilience and hope. It's a call to others to confront their wounds and find their strength. In my masterclass today, I'll blend theories to explore how trauma shapes us, not just mentally, but holistically. And you may have noticed in your own coaching environment that clients come to you with goals, but they just seem to have this psychological and emotional barrier to achieving them. And hopefully this will shed light on why that is. So who is this webinar for? Well, this webinar is for anybody who really is interested in understanding trauma's prevalence and its impact on your clients' goals. If you want to gain confidence in identifying trauma signs in yourself and others, and how to master a secure and supportive environment for clients who are affected by trauma, and overcoming any coaching challenges to deepen client connections, because it does allow you to go to a deeper level. So does any of this sound familiar to you? If these scenarios resonate with you, just know that you're kind of not alone here. And this is what I frequently found in my clients. They feel deeply, and it resonates with me personally as well, feeling deeply inadequate, searching for a greater purpose, but feeling lost, aware of untapped potential, but unable to access it, hesitant to show your authentic self, consistently overgiving in relationships and not getting the same back, grappling with self-doubt, worry, and perfectionism, such a big one, self-sabotaging relationships and career due to fear of failure, another huge one. Well, if any of those do resonate, then just know that you're in the right place, becoming trauma-informed. This method is not just about coping or masking or goal achievement. It's about thriving. It enables your clients to move beyond feelings of inadequacy, to help them uncover their authentic selves, which really I found was a theme that people want to find their authenticity in this world. So with this approach, they can transform their past experiences into well springs of purpose and strength. It's a bit like turning scars into stars, which is a lovely expression where every challenge becomes a step towards self-discovery and empowerment. So trauma, why is trauma the defining word of our times? Well, amazingly, the trauma-informed coaching industry has evolved into a $2 billion industry, reflecting a deepening awareness of trauma's profound impact on our lives. You may have read the book, but Dr. Bessel, I never get this right, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's best-selling book, The Body Keeps the Score. I mean, raise your hand if you've read that book. It's amazing. It's fantastic. along with many other books that are on my bookshelves. But that book sold over 2 million copies globally. And that marks a turning point in people wanting to understand and heal from trauma. I know people who have that book who are not practitioners, who are not therapists, they're not coaches, you know, they're in corporate land, but this book has resonated with them. So trauma has now entered mainstream with its presence in our media and discussions by celebrities like Justin Bieber and Lady Gaga. The hashtag trauma has amassed over 6.2 billion mentions online, and renowned figures, including Olympian athlete Simone Biles, openly discusses their mental health challenges. The rising number of Google searches for trauma and its widespread discussion on platforms like TikTok indicate the surge in public interest. And significant global events such as the 2016 election, the Me Too movement, systemic racism issues, and the COVID-19 pandemic have thrust trauma into a global discussion, thankfully leading to meaningful insights and actions. But the shift has transformed the perception of trauma from a once only clinical term to a cultural touchstone, recognizing its profound influence and sparking vital conversations about its implications to us all. And as we'll go on to see, the groundbreaking ACEs study is paramount. It's revolutionized our understanding of childhood trauma and its long-lasting effects on our health. And the study, as you'll soon learn, has become a pivotal and influential milestone in healthcare, revealing the far-reaching impacts of trauma. I'm just going to have a sip of my tea. Is everybody with me so far?
Yes, we're just checking because one person can't actually see the slides, but I think since everybody else can, the problem must be from her side. Lindsay, oh, she's got it. Okay, there we are. Sorry, go back.
Excellent. And people, I'm sure, can catch the replay as well. So what is the ACEs study? I don't know if anybody had heard of the ACEs study. I had through a friend who was experiencing some addictions, and they introduced him to the ACEs study, and that was eye-opening for this particular person to understand that their childhood experiences were really shaping their behaviors as an adult. Such eye-opener for them. But the ACEs study by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente has revolutionized our understanding of health. By investigating over 17,000 adults, the study uncovered a stark truth that childhood traumas like abuse and neglect are strongly linked to major health issues in childhood, including chronic diseases, mental illness, heart disease, autoimmune, and even early death. The insight has shifted our perspective, showing that health transcends the physical. It is intricately tied to emotional experiences, often invisible but profoundly influential. The study highlighted a direct correlation. More childhood adversities, so the more of these, we'll go on to the categories that fall into the ACEs study, but the more you have, the more likely you are to experience severe health conditions later in life. The study was pioneered by Dr. Folletti and Anda. This research emerged from their work as they were working with obesity clients, and it was just by happen chance they came across and kind of gave birth to this revolutionary study. It was only by chance this happened, and I'll explain to you now. So it really is a thank you to two of Dr. Folletti's patients, Donna and Patty, who really helped to help him understand that our early programming, our early experiences really accumulate into severe adult behaviors, negative behaviors that hold people back and even cause premature death. So Dr. Folletti's obesity program saw remarkable initial success with the likes of Donna and Patty. who lost weight, adopted healthier lifestyles, but soon relapsed. Baffling Dr. Folletti, he went in search for answers. And by accident, just through curiosity, he discovered that both had suffered severe childhood traumas. So through interviewing them, asking them a series of questions, this became an enlightening experience. They both suffered severe abuse, neglect, and incest at a really young age, which left deep emotional scars impacting their health and weight. So the link between their traumatic pasts and current health struggles were eye-opening, and it highlighted without unreasonable doubt how their unresolved childhood trauma had manifested into their severe chronic health issues and obesity. But their stories were pivotal in understanding the ACEs' impact. And this insight revolutionized healthcare, emphasizing the need to consider childhood trauma in the health and wellness programs. It marked a shift towards a more holistic approach to treatment, integrating mental and physical well-being. So what are ACEs and what lasting impact have they correlated? Well, they've put the ACEs into 10 categories. So as a child between the ages of 0 to 17, this was 17,000 adults conducted an in-depth study into their childhood to see if they'd experienced any of these ACEs and if they had these health issues. So physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical and emotional neglect, anybody in the household who had substance abuse, anybody in the household with mental illness, parental separation or divorce, an incarcerated household member, and witnessing domestic violence. And the health issues that they now can link that go with these emotional impacts are chronic diseases such as heart disease, cancer and diabetes, mental health problems including depression and anxiety, substance abuse and addiction, something called risky behaviors, smoking, gambling, unprotected sex, multiple partners, social and relationship difficulties, and early mortality. So the prevalence and impact of ACEs. So throughout this study, they were able to get the data. And what surprised them was trauma has no social or cultural boundaries. It affects us all. And they analysed the data to understand the connection between the ACEs and the adult health outcomes. And they found that individuals, as I say, with more ACEs, so had experienced, let's say, emotional abuse, maybe an incarcerated adult, was present, or a parent separated, etc. So that's considered as more ACEs. So the prevalence, about 64% of adults reported at least one ACE, and approximately 12% report 4 or more. The health impact, more ACEs are linked to a higher risk of the chronic health conditions that we've discussed, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and more. Mental health, ACEs increase the likelihood of mental health, depression, anxiety, PTSD. Substance abuse is a connection between ACEs and a greater risk of substance abuse. Social and behavioural outcomes, ACEs are associated with lower education, unemployment, and involvement in criminal activities, early mortality. So the more ACEs correlate with a higher likelihood of premature death. Generational impact, childhood trauma can affect future generations, perpetuating a cycle of adversity, which is something I experienced when I had postnatal depression, kind of faced with a choice. Thankfully, I could feel that if I didn't change my trajectory, my journey, I was going to pass down the same generational pain and trauma onto my son, and that was something I did not want. So what exactly is trauma? Trauma is a nervous system response to experiences that are too much, too fast, or too long for an individual to process. I think, you know, at some point in the past, trauma was deemed as an event. You know, it was traumatic because it was a war or you know, suicide or terrorism or something like that. We would consider that was traumatic. Well, actually, this ACEs study has proven it's not. It's just when it overwhelms a person's nervous system that's considered traumatic. It's not about the event. Trauma can lead to enduring feelings of fear, helplessness, and intense distress, impacting mental and emotional well-being significantly. And long-term stress from trauma can result in lasting health issues and physical symptoms. Trauma can stem from accidents, abuse, natural disasters, or ongoing stress and adversity. So what happens to us when we react to trauma? You know, we all know we have this inbuilt kind of autonomic nervous system that kind of senses danger. And if any of us have ever been in, you know, situations where our nervous system kicks in, we know that like our body just takes over. We can't think straight. Our body is just reacting to this fear-based inbuilt system that we have. So what does happen when we react to trauma? Well, picture yourself strolling through a forest when suddenly a growling bear appears. Instantly, your brain recognizes the danger and a sophisticated series of reactions is triggered. So we have this immediate stress response, and what it does is it activates lower brain functions and switches off the higher brain functions. And this is vital for survival in dangerous situations. We need this to happen. Lower brain functions, including the brainstem and the limbic system, so our earliest survival system, takes over our basic survival instincts and processes. So our higher brain functions are just temporarily suspended, such as complex thinking, reasoning, and decision making. Chronic stress or trauma can keep the lower brain dominant for extended periods, and prolonged suppression of higher brain functions can have detrimental effects on cognitive abilities, emotional regulation, and overall mental health. And if you know any teachers, and teachers potentially in kind of adverse, you know, areas, they will say it's much harder for those children to concentrate. You know, if they don't have certain structures in place at home, or they're not in a flourishing environment, they will really struggle to cope in a school environment. I'm just going to have another sip of my tea. Is everybody okay so far?
Yep, all good.
Okay, good. So trauma can be categorized into two types. They call it large T trauma and little t trauma. So little t traumas, they're not, you know, they're not thought of as life threatening, such as a terrorism attack or a war or something like that, but can disrupt normal functioning and accumulate over time, affecting individuals unexpectedly. Examples include life changes, relationships events like divorce or conflicts, and life stresses such as financial troubles or work-related stress. And, you know, we've all been through this kind of pandemic together, and, you know, it's been a couple of years now, but the effects are still there. And what the pandemic did to us, if we already had trauma, will have exasperated it. It's like a cherry on top. Whereas large T traumas are extraordinary experiences that induce severe distress, like the war and the terrorism. And they can be one-time events, natural disasters, terrorism, sexual assault, or prolonged stresses like war, child abuse, neglect, or ongoing violence. So where we used to think of trauma as the large T trauma, it's actually not. It is, but it's also these little traumas as well that most of us do experience. So these can lead to adaptive behaviors. Our inbuilt nervous system response, as we've talked about, is sophisticated. It's adaptive. It's finely honed through evolution to aid our survival in these perilous situations. When we encounter stress, our brain and body undergo a series of hormonal changes, gearing us to face and deal with these threats, the fight, freeze. It's a primal reaction that unleashes a surge of adrenaline and cortisol. This response triggers an increase in heart rate, it sharpens our senses and redirects our body's energy, all to prepare us for immediate action. However, it's crucial to understand that while this response is vital in emergencies, chronic stress or ongoing trauma can leave lasting effects on our health. Some people just literally can't switch it off, they can't dial it back down. And repeated activation of this response can strain our systems, leading to long-term health issues and other factors such as adaptive behaviors. So we can have behavioral changes, which include maladaptive coping mechanisms such as substance abuse, self-harm, risky behaviors as a way to manage overwhelming stress, things like spending money, gambling, overeating, anything that is trying to really soothe their nervous system. Or we have an altered brain structure. Prolonged exposure to stress hormones can lead to structural changes in the brain, particularly in areas responsible for emotional regulation, memory, and stress response. This can further exacerbate mental health issues. Reduced resilience. Chronic stress can lower an individual's resilience, making it challenging to cope with future stresses or traumatic events effectively. And social isolation. People experiencing long-term stress due to trauma may withdraw from social interactions and isolate themselves, further impacting their mental well-being. So trauma comes in all different types. It varies widely. It can be developmental, acute, chronic, complex. Coaches need to understand that each person's trauma is unique and influenced by their experiences and perceptions. So recognizing different types of trauma will help coaches foster resilience and adapt their healing modalities with their clients. It's also super vital to refer clients to trauma therapists when needed. So trauma-informed coaching involves respecting these individual differences and tailoring support to each client's boundaries. So it's not about treating the trauma, it's about helping a client navigate their future without the trauma impacting them and shaping their decisions. But the primary types of trauma to be aware of are acute. So that's a single distressing event, accident or attack. Chronic is prolonged exposure to stress like abuse or war. Complex is multiple traumatic events. So those layers of trauma, often interpersonal like long-term abuse. Developmental trauma occurs in childhood and it impacts development, often due to neglect or mistreatment. Historical or generational trauma, which is passed down from previous generations who've experienced profound traumas like genocide. Secondary trauma or vicarious trauma is definitely something for coaches to look out for because it can affect you indirectly. So a lot of nurses, police will have this. And systemic trauma results from oppressive systems that marginalize groups, leading to stress and trauma. Medical trauma, severe illness and injury, and invasive medical treatments. Environmental trauma stems from natural disasters or living in high-risk environments. And betrayal trauma occurs when trust is broken, such as through infidelity. So that's quite eye-opening, really, is to think about all these different experiences that are now kind of classed as a trauma variety. So what are the signs and the symptoms of trauma? So, something that you want to be mindful of yourself. I know I've experienced some of these myself personally when going through postnatal depression. But emotionally, we can feel the sadness, the anger, the denial, the fear, the shame. That may lead to nightmares, insomnia, difficulty with our relationships and emotional outbursts. We can experience nausea, dizziness, altered sleep patterns, changes in appetite, headaches, and the gastrointestinal problems are a big sign. And psychologically, this can lead to PTSD, depression, anxiety, dissociative disorders, substance abuse problems. So just to put this into context then, how this might look in a person who may come to coaching. So meet Anna. She's a 38-year-old woman who seeks the help of a trauma-informed coach. Well, Anna has a history of childhood ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, that have significantly impacted her life. And she's not going to come to you saying, I have all these, she'll never probably heard of this study. So it's within your consultation that you will ask about her history as a child. How was her relationship with mom, dad, etc. During her childhood, she experienced emotional neglect and physical abuse from her parents. She also witnessed domestic violence between her parents regularly. As an adult, Anna struggles with chronic anxiety, low self-esteem, and difficulty forming healthy relationships. She often feels overwhelmed by her emotions and finds it challenging to trust others. Despite her professional success, she feels unfulfilled and stuck in a cycle of self-doubt. She wants to achieve success and have healthy relationships, so she decides to work with a trauma-informed coach to address the deep-seated effects of her childhood. Together with the coach, she aims to build resilience, heal past wounds, and develop healthier coping strategies. Through trauma-informed coaching, Anna hopes to break free from the patterns of her past and lead a more fulfilling life. This example really just touches on and illustrates how an individual with a history of ACEs can benefit from trauma-informed coaching to address the lingering impacts of the childhood trauma. The trauma may not be kind of with her right now, but she knows she's formed beliefs and patterns of behavior that have stemmed from that. So just take a moment briefly, think about yourself or think about clients, but reflect on your own life experience or about the clients that you work with or people that you know. How have childhood traumas like experiences of loss, abandonment, or physical and emotional challenges subtly shaped yours or their life goals or their trust in relationships and personal habits? You may just have one really strong memory from the past that still emotionally lives within you. Feel free to write it down or you can share it with me if you like, but obviously no pressure or judgment to do that. But it's just to really get you to think about how we look at trauma now. We've taken it, not taken it from the clinical setting, it's still there, but it's moved into a much broader sphere, which is our own personal lives, and really exploring how our early childhood experiences have had a lasting impact on our nervous system and the way that we think and behave. So why become trauma informed? Well, really because of trauma's prevalence. With 1 in 4 adults, they've experienced trauma. They're coming to your coaching, they're trying to reach their goals, but they're going to be held back by their survival, their fear-based survival responses. Trauma-informed coaching recognizes, its pervasive effects and empowers clients to overcome its influence without being defined. Nobody wants to be defined by their trauma. Nobody wants to, when we think about creating a future, we don't want to be held back by our past trauma, but people don't recognize it as being traumatic. So a trauma-informed approach, it broadens our outlook and establishes a secure and trusting foundation between the coach and the client, because the coach knows what trauma is. The coach knows how trauma affects people, knows what trauma looks like. A coach knows what trauma does to a person's perception of the world. So clients are also much more likely to attain their goals and actively participate in the coaching process when they experience being acknowledged, listened to, and valued. Trauma-informed coach recognizes, as I say, the impact of trauma. It knows the brain-body response, and it knows about things like the polyvagal theory and the window of tolerance. A trauma-informed coach can create a safe and empathetic coaching environment. It's not just about really focusing on how we're going to get you to achieve this goal. Let's put the steps in from where you are now to get you to your goal. Yes, amazing, that has its place, but what's stopping them? That's the deeper element we can go. So a trauma-informed coach helps clients address and process their trauma, develop resilience, and develop strategies to overcome these obstacles, ultimately increasing their chance of achieving their goals. As trauma awareness grows now beyond the clinical settings into general society, coaches must understand their role. They are not therapists, but can play a crucial part in guiding clients past their adversities, referring them to mental health professionals when necessary. You probably already do this in your practice anyway. I'm sure you're all amazing coaches and you create the empathetic support, I'm sure you create these lovely environments with your clients already, but just having this added information about trauma and how it might be present in your client gives you the scope to open your perspective. Resilience building is a big key for helping people achieve their goals, because remember, that fear-based nervous system will override anything your client wants to achieve. So it's really focusing on soothing that, helping them build resilience, because unresolved trauma, will manifest in ways where your client will have talks such as self-doubt, fear of failure, self-sabotaging behavior. These are all the emotional barriers which hinder progress and limit the client's ability to move forward. So facilitating their progress, trauma can affect your client's self-esteem massively, making it challenging to set ambitious goals, or even though they set these ambitious goals, having the ability to achieve them is something else. Focus and resolution. Additionally, the stress and anxiety associated with trauma can impede focus, decision-making, and overall productivity. I know from my own personal experience, my default, whenever a stressful situation was in my life, I would just run away. I was literally fight, flight, freeze. I just legged it, I was nowhere to be seen. I could not deal with dealing with it. So why can't trauma survivors simply get over it? It's, as I say, and I hope you understand, trauma is so individual. It's not the event, it's how the person responds to it. It's how their nervous system is impeded. Trauma is complex and individual. They have overwhelming emotions which affect the brain and the body. It often leads to coping mechanisms and triggers, and healing is a unique process that requires time, support, and understanding. So what prevents resilience? So resilience is a key factor in bouncing back. And you might know people where, they just bounce back from anything easily, and other people really don't have that same bounce back factor. Well, resilience does mean the capacity to recover from difficulties. It's an invaluable trait that we can all kind of work on and cultivate. However, its development and expression can be hindered by various factors, and that is prolonged exposure to trauma. So continuous traumatic experiences can erode an individual's ability to bounce back. So these layers that we have can really kind of suppress the person's ability, their resilience factor. If somebody doesn't have enough social support, so the absence of a supportive social network can leave individuals more vulnerable to the impacts of stress and adversity. So that means in their early years, let's say, they didn't have that pillar of strength that they could trust in, that they could turn to, that could say, there, it's going to be okay, or this is the way we deal with our stress, we can do this type of attitude. They just didn't have that support system. And ongoing stresses, constant pressure, emotional, financial, or professional, can overwhelm an individual's coping mechanisms. It can just grind people down. And negative self-perception, a self-view tainted by negativity or a lack of self-worth, can hinder one's ability to develop resilience. So working with clients is essential to understand that their resilience may be stifled by some of these elements. So the rising role of spirituality and holistic healing in trauma recovery. I don't know, you may have heard, you may have read the book, but Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who wrote of his experiences in a Nazi concentration camp, and his quote is, "Man is not destroyed by suffering. He's destroyed by suffering without meaning." So finding meaning amidst trauma is a vital component of the healing journey. It offers a beacon of purpose and direction, enabling clients to comprehend their experiences and chart a course towards recovery. So this approach to recovery extends beyond the realms of conventional therapy. It embraces a holistic and spiritual practice, such as meditation and yoga, which contribute significantly to the healing process. Mindfulness, for sure, and meditation have really been researched into its benefits on like cardiovascular, health conditions. The perspective kind of does draw inspiration from the philosophy of Viktor Frankl, who emphasized like finding meaning really does, it's a pivotal catalyst for somebody's healing and personal growth. It's looking back and saying, okay, I've had that experience, but how has that positively changed me? And trying to draw the strengths from that. Something that you can adopt, I'm going to give you some questions that you can use with your clients, but it's called the beginner's mind. It's a Zen approach to trauma. You can embrace this mind with yourself the next time you experience something, or it's actually known as So-Shin, a beginner's mind approach. And it means that you approach each session with openness and empathy, treating each client's story as unique and creating a non-judgmental space. It's where we shed biases, adopt fresh perspectives, and stay fully present, helping clients navigate complex emotions like guilt, shame, facilitating a more effective healing process. And this approach empowers clients to uncover new insights, fostering a transformative journey towards their self-discovery and growth. So that might sound like something you already do. Well, just see if you can maybe go deeper with that, because as humans, not just coaches, we have biases. So, and it's not to judge that, it's just a fact of life. We have biases. If we can approach every session like we have never heard another client scenario before, like we have no frame of reference to what our client is telling us, and we are so open and curious to really hear it as if we're hearing it for the first ever time. It's approaching this fresh, non-biased perspective. So here are a few questions that you can potentially use with your clients. So you might like reframe a question, which would be, what aspects of your current situation or challenges do you feel are worth exploring with a fresh perspective? So that is also getting the client into this beginner's mind as well. When you say with a fresh perspective, it makes the person think differently. Can you share your experience from the beginning as if I'm hearing it for the first time? I want to understand it from your perspective. Saying that to a client really helps them understand that you are so focused on being in their shoes for the moment so you can fully embrace how they feel. In what ways can we approach your goals with curiosity and openness as if they're entirely new endeavors? Again, it's tapping into the higher brain mind. It's opening up the space for creativity and insight. Is there something from your past that you'd like to re-examine, considering it from a new angle to gain deeper insight? How can we create a coaching environment where you feel safe to share openly and explore your experiences without judgment? I think without judgment is a big key. Quite often in my coaching practice, people have said to me, wow, that's the first time I've ever said that or shared that out loud or told anyone else. It's such a privileged position that we're in as coaches. And quite often, and it's usually been male clients who've said, I've never told anybody that before, so just having that open space where there is no shame here, there is no judgment here. So something that I am personally fully invested in is finding the sacred within our biology. Now, one of the kind of philosophies I work with are the chakra system, the energy body, the chakra system. But, once considered as pseudoscience, thankfully, it has been researched by the likes of Margaret Moger. And here is a little quote here. From Modern Scientific Insights. In working with healers, I've observed a unique magnetic field waveform associated with energy healing, the discharge of characteristics of Rishian orgone, which is universal life force or cosmic energy. And there's a link there if you want to go and read her research paper on chakras. So my trauma-informed and spiritual facilitator training, it combines the ancient teachings of the chakras with modern scientific insights into helping people kind of overcome these ACEs, their childhood trauma. And it really does link. I found it to be the missing link. For instance, we can relate each chakra. So there are 7 chakras. We can relate each chakra, but specifically the first 3, with our earliest life experiences. For instance, what we call the root chakra. So as you can imagine, roots of the tree, it's our base chakra. This has life themes around our earliest upbringing. What was happening to mum when we were in utero? Did we feel safe? All of those things. Then we move up to the next chakra, the sacral. It's all about emotions, intimacy, etc., etc. But it bridges the gap between, the mindset and just touching a deeper part of somebody. It helps them to understand their story and recognizing the need for interventions that restore balance to these energy centers. Are healing strategies with the aim for holistic recovery. In conclusion, then, healing is a return to safety. It begins with the metaphorical tiger or the bear in the woods, which is that constant fear and threat, and replacing it by safety, allowing our overtaxed or overworked nervous system to relax. It's a transition from a state of hyperarousal, but people can also go into different states, hypoarousal as well. So the different states of the nervous system, one is like really wired and the one is like, I can't get out of bed. And we want to return it to a sanctuary of safety to help aid this recovery from trauma, transforming fear into empowerment and resilience and paving the way for genuine healing and hope. So thank you. Thank you for listening. I know it was a lot of information to take in. And if anybody is ready to take the next step to become trauma informed, then obviously that's where I can help you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Come on back on so we can see you. There she is. No, it was absolutely, fascinating, really fascinating, and a lot of food for thought, and indeed the way that it's moved from the clinical into the everyday. Now, there are lots of questions, and actually, before I move on, I'd actually, to be honest, totally forgotten the book that I've almost finished, Alchemy of the Soul, was from you. I was a bit like, oh my gosh, is that Anne-Marie? Yes. So a book I do recommend working through the chakras. It's extremely good.
Yeah.
Right, let's go to the chats because there's been a lot of conversations, lots of questions along the ACE study, but also about that, that border between, when should coaches go towards trauma or not. So, I mean, I don't know if you want to take them in order or not. There are quite
fire
a few
away.
of them.
I'm happy to go with you.
Okay, here we are. Here's the first one. Okay, I have unless you all want to do it yourselves. I mean, Lindsay, feel free to shoot your first one if you want.
Yeah, sure. I can summarize it quickly.
Do that. Yeah.
Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yeah.
I have an issue with the ACEs. I think they're fine in themselves, but they're very specific. Have you been in a family with divorce? Have you seen, abuse, sexual abuse, violence? They don't uncover the thing I see the most, which is the absence of, which is what most people really come with deep safety related trauma and things. It's and where coaching can help is where they've not had something, and ACEs just don't pick that up. And also we're not qualified. Well, I mean, I do somatic work and other stuff as well as coaching. We're not qualified to look at ACEs and things like that. That's for the therapeutic space. So it was a fantastic introduction to trauma.
Yeah.
But I'm not quite sure how ACEs really help us other than understanding some people have them, but they're only a very small part of it. So what was your thought about?
I think you make a good point there. And I think when you're saying about the absence, do you mean like the absence of a supportive parent or caregiver?
Emotion, you actually mentioned emotional neglect on your list, but that's not in the ACE questions. And actually emotion as in the complete lack of support, the complete lack of a loving environment, just the absent or an emotionally absent parent. So that's what I mean by the absence completely.
It's a really good point, because that makes me think, I mean, that came into where we lack resilience, when we haven't had that supportive parents that can negate our kind of bounce back factor and cause adversity later in life. When we have stress, we can't deal with it as well as somebody who's had more of a supportive environment. But if you think about a person who's had it all, let's say, as a child, had this great kind of mum, dad were there, no shortage of money, that typical scenario, but parents weren't actually present. They were working all the time. They just weren't present. That is still part of, neglect, kind of emotional.
Absolutely. That wasn't the question. It was absolutely, you're right. They're not included in the ACEs. So I guess the question is, I would say that we shouldn't be looking too much at these ACEs. The ACEs aren't the be all and end all of trauma, I guess is.
No, absolutely not. And it's individual, isn't it? Yeah, sure. They're just the categories in the study that they piloted.
Correct. It's one study. It's one It's not the study. It's not the
no
answer.
and
okay,
exactly.
Cool.
And your kind of coaching style will be driven by what their their background is and their adversities are.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Lindsay. And I see Stephen Hopkins is also saying, to be very careful not to interpolate from the ACEs study, and the study and the findings are very specific to the response to the questions asked in the questionnaire. Yeah. So, okay, then we move on to Jacqueline. Jacqueline, do you want to say it yourself?
Yeah, I just first of all, thank you for the presentation. I think it's really important for us to know about trauma, and I work with young people, the care systems, or have done. And I think there was a lack of knowledge around all those impacts, especially the impacts from childhood and how they have an impact on adults. So I think the more that message gets out there, the better, in terms of people understanding, what it can mean. But I just had a question around, how do you assess when a client's trauma needs, when the client's trauma needs therapeutic input rather than coaching? Because it's you don't want to go into that realm when you don't have the experience to deal with it. So it's really a question around,
100%, you don't want to go,
assessment.
and you want to support them, and also support them by suggesting that how, you know, their issue may be better served with a professional therapist. You can still be there for them, you're not abandoning them, etc. So I do think some of this comes down to common sense as well. You know, coaches do need to know their due diligence. They need to know their remit. That's not to say anytime a client says, I experienced a trauma, you go, oh, I can't deal with you, I have to refer you. It's how the trauma is impacting them. Have they had previous therapy? How do they feel when they talk about this trauma? Has this trauma just kind of, you know, has it just surfaced with them? How is it affecting them? Do they have any maladaptive behaviors? That kind of thing. That's when you have to kind of like understand, like, what does this person really need? Can you professionally provide it? You know, a coach is there really to help them get to where they want to be in the future. As we now see the prevalence of trauma, how are they experiencing that right now? You know, is it being reactivated or not? Or are they okay with it? You know, maybe they have a history of, they've been through therapy, they're okay with it. They just need to get to this next phase, and they feel a coach is going to be the thing that gets them there.
Yeah, no, I think it's I mean, in some cases it's more apparent, and if people are able to talk about it, and you know, they have had some input around that in their past, so they're aware. I guess the difficulty is more when people don't know. So you might think, oh, there's some trauma going on here, but that person isn't aware, but they want to be coached, and you might have to sort of say, well, actually, you know.
Yeah, I've seen it, and you hear it, and it's in their behaviors and it's in their language. You know, for instance, for an example, it wasn't my client, but it was an assessment somebody sent in to me to review, and their client wanted coaching because, I can't remember, there's something to do with the workplace or finding a girlfriend, I can't remember now, but the huge triggers were, and I made the person go back and say, it's, you know, our professional advice that you do seek some professional support for this, because they have maladaptive behaviors, basically, in a nutshell, drinking, etc., etc. And the way that they were speaking, their behaviors were aligned to a therapeutic situation, not really a coaching one. It was outside of the scope.
Okay, thank you.
But again, it is difficult, right, isn't it? I mean, that is actually what we're saying. There is no clear symptom where you say, okay, I've heard the word, I need to refer them on, but that you do need to use your common sense, and in your questioning realize when it is something that could do with having some therapy either in parallel, or, you know, that you're still there for them, that they come back once they've gone over that side of thing. But it is a fine line. And I see, actually, Lindsay, you also mentioned on that as well, the dangerous space for a coach. Stephen, because we don't have that much time, I see Stephen has some concerns about the concept of little t trauma. Are you still there, Stephen? Okay. Has anybody ever lived a life without little t trauma? I mean, that was something that actually I came across not so long ago as well, is that some of the things before, we didn't call those trauma, right? Trauma was reserved for what you were saying, you know, the clinical, the big stuff. You're thinking about, okay, but, you know, I haven't had this or I haven't had that. And now it has more entered into the normal. So he says, how does little t trauma sit outside the normal range?
It's well, little t trauma is the normal range,
right.
and normal range, it's everybody, again, it's subjective, isn't it? What your normal range is. When I think about normal range, it's like that window of tolerance, what we can tolerate before our nervous system swings into hyper arousal or hypo, which is too highly wired or kind of really zoned out and dissociated. So it's figuring out what range means.
Yeah,
that might be subjective.
Because I think that is, it's all in the word trauma, right? So, you know, we've been taught, you know, you stay away from trauma. But back then, sort of trauma was more, the, you know, the really, the big T trauma, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, I mean, some of the little T trauma, I think we probably can, you know, through introducing a different perspective, through, but we wouldn't, I don't think, have called them trauma 20 or 30
Well, you
years
know,
ago.
we don't. I mean, we might not go in as a coaching. I mean, I just remember back in the first, you know, days when I was coaching, and I would see professional people, and they were, you know, one particularly like super successful, but like wanted to achieve this goal, or actually didn't achieve their childhood dream because father had been so domineering, perfectionism, quite negative, derogatory. They're those little T traumas that are now preventing this 50-plus-year-old professor
From functioning.
Yeah, from achieving the thing. So that's our realm. You know, if he'd said, "Oh,
Yeah,
look, I've got sleepless nights. I'm finding like I'm socially isolating myself. I've got these drinking too much." That's when it starts to be a more therapeutic setting. That's when you start to think, I can't help this person fully here.
right. So it's hearing more about sort of the excessive behavior, and also maybe if it's been going on for a long time, or if they've tried various things and still come back to it, you know, that the coaching isn't something which is going to go deep enough for that sort of
So in my conversation with him, it was through the conversation that it transpired he had this memory as a child where his fear-based autonomic nervous system had, you know, gone into overdrive. So we've got like these frozen kind of memories. We've got this trapped in our bodies, and the fear around being seen, you know, achieving something that is not what our family desires. These are the things we can track it back. You know, as an adult, you think you have authority and autonomy over your life. Well, a lot of us have these frozen inbuilt fear responses to being seen, to living authentically. It sounds crazy, but it's so true.
Yeah. And so some of those, you know, those are the ones that we can also through conversation. Okay, we have run out of time. I mentioned Lindsay was also talking about Bessel and the polyvagal theory. Trauma, meditation is contradicted. Okay, it has to go. Lots of thank you. Very informative. We need to go now. Exactly. So we've got to the end of that. I mean, thank you very, very much. I mean, I would certainly recommend to anybody listening any of your books.
Thank you.
I am very much enjoying and having a lot of eye-opening moments with Alchemy of the Soul. Thank you for all that you do, and thank you to the rest of you for having wanted to understand, you know, about trauma for us as coaches and how we can best help our clients and when it's time to help them on. So thank you for having made time here. Make sure to write your notes in your book so that you don't, you know, forget about that. And that I think you've given us a lot of food for thought and lots of triggers that we will have when we're with our clients, Anne-Marie. So thank you very, very much. And
my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thanks everybody for joining. I appreciate it. Nice to meet you all.
Have a lovely evening, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.